Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning we'll be looking at another discourse from the Buddha. And this one is the Visākhāsutta from the Udana, chapter 8, sutta number 8. And so I'll pay homage to the Buddha and then read through the discourse and give some explanations. And you're welcome to type in questions at any time and I'll respond to them at the end. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, so as mentioned, this is Udana chapter 8, sutta number 8, the Visākhāsutta. So I'm reading here from Bhante Suddhāso's translation of Sutta Central. And so the discourse begins. Thus have I heard. At one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi, in the stilt longhouse of Megara's mother in the eastern monastery. Now at that time, the dear and beloved granddaughter of Visākha, Megara's mother, had just passed away. Now, then, in the middle of the day, Visākha, with wet clothes and hair, went to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down. The comment here about her going with wet clothes and hair, this was a reference to a mourning practice, practice of grieving that was sometimes done at that time in India, where when a loved one passed away, one would douse oneself in cold water. So as a way of expressing one's grief externally. So Visākha she had just lost her beloved granddaughter, so she doused herself in cold water, and full of grief, she goes and talks to the Buddha. And Visākha was already a Buddhist at the time, so Visākha again had donated this monastery to the Sangha, which is where the Buddha was currently staying. And she goes to the Buddha and bows to him before speaking to him. So these are both indications that she was already a dedicated Buddhist. So the Buddha says, Visākha, where are you coming from in the middle of the day with wet clothes and hair? And she replies, Bhante, my beloved granddaughter has just passed away. That is why I came here in the middle of the day with wet clothes and hair. And the Buddha says, Visākha, would you like to have as many children and grandchildren as there are people in the whole of Savatthi? And she replies, yes, Bhante. So keeping in mind that Savatthi was one of the largest cities at that time in that region of India, so that would have been a lot of people, possibly hundreds of thousands of people. So she apparently wants to have a lot of children and grandchildren. And the Buddha says, but Visākha, how many people pass away each day in Savatthi? And she says, Bhante, every day 10 people die in Savatthi, or else 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. At least one person dies every day in Savatthi. Savatthi is never without someone dying. Which this is actually a very important statement. It's recognizing that death is natural, it's common, it's everywhere, it's happening all the time. So if you think to yourself, it's like, how often in my life does a loved one die? Probably, depending on the size of your family, at least once every few years. A grandparent dies, or a parent dies, or an aunt or an uncle dies, or a cousin dies. There's always someone passing away once every few years. So if you even just take a group of 10 or 20 or 30 people, then somebody is dying every year. If you take a group of 100 or 1,000 people, then people are dying every day. It just becomes completely normal. And when you're dealing with large populations of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, then there's lots of people dying every single day. So death is commonplace. And one thing which we know for sure is that every single one of us is eventually going to die, sooner or later. And actually, if we understand the Buddha's teachings, we also know that we've already died countless times, because this is the nature of the cycle of rebirth. We're constantly dying and being reborn, dying and being reborn. So death is actually completely normal and commonplace. There's not actually anything fundamentally wrong with it. It's just part of the cycles of nature. So anyway, so the Buddha asks Visākha, how many people die each day in Savatthi? And she says, at least one person dies every day in Savatthi. Savatthi is never without people dying. Oh, okay, good. And so the Buddha says, what do you think, Visākha? Would there ever be a time when your clothes and hair were not wet? And she says, no, Bhante. It would be enough, Bhante, with so many children and grandchildren. So in other words, just a moment ago, the Buddha said, so you like having children and grandchildren, don't you? Would you like to have as many as there are in this whole city? So 100,000 of them? And she replies, yes, absolutely. I would love to have so many children and grandchildren. I'd personally rather have 0. But she apparently wants to have thousands and thousands of them. And so so then the Buddha, he's pointing out, well, if people in this city are dying every day, then if you had that many children and grandchildren, then that means you would have loved ones dying every day. So that's his point when he says, would there ever be a time when your clothes and hair were not wet? In other words, would there ever be a time when you weren't grieving? If you actually did have thousands of loved ones, that means you're going to have loved ones dying all the time, which means you're going to constantly be in a state of grief. And so then the Buddha says, he says, Visākha, those who have 100 loved ones have 100 sufferings. This is more clear in Pali. The translation is a little bit awkward here, but in Pali the Buddha says, Ye sang satang piyani, satang te sang dukkani. One who has 100 loved ones has 100 dukkhas. And he says, those who have 90 loved ones have 90 dukkhas. Those who have 80 loved ones have 80 dukkhas. And he goes down, all the way down to 1. And he says, if you even just have one loved one, then you have one dukkha. And then he says, those who have no loved ones have no dukkha. They are free of sorrow. They are free of stains. They are free of anguish. So this is a very interesting statement. So first off, we can completely understand what he's saying here. So when we have people who we have attachment to, people who we are obsessed with or fixated on in one way or another, then whenever anything unfortunate or unpleasant happens to them, then we suffer. So actually right now there's people dying all over the world. There's people in extreme anguish and misery all over the world. But most of them are people that we don't know. People that we don't even know of, let alone have any attachment towards. So we're not particularly affected by it. I mean, maybe if you stop and think about it, you're like, oh, it's kind of sad that somebody somewhere is dying. But it doesn't really touch the heart in the same way as it is when it's your own mother or your sister or your best friend that's dying. Then it pierces the heart. Then we feel that intense suffering. But when it's just this kind of vague idea of like, oh yeah, somebody somewhere is dying, it's kind of like, okay, too bad, I guess, but it doesn't pierce the heart. So again, the Buddha is pointing here to the danger of developing any kind of emotional attachment towards any particular person, because then that creates the condition for suffering to invade the mind. If you're attached to somebody, then whenever something harmful or unpleasant happens, then you suffer. Or if that relationship changes. One thing that comes up relatively often, I was talking recently to a lady who, she had been really, really good friends with somebody for many, many, many years. And then the relationship changed. and her friends started to become unpleasant and even hostile, started to become rude, verbally abusive. And this lady was really suffering a lot. She was really suffering a lot because she had this attachment to this friend, long-term friend, and that friendship was falling apart. They were losing the friend they once had. And why were they suffering? They were suffering because of their attachment to their memory of their past friendship, attachment to things being in a particular way. So whenever we're attached to things being in a particular way, then we suffer, because the nature of all things is to change. The nature of all things is that they're unreliable, unstable, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. And this especially applies to other people. So Visākha, in this story, Visākha's granddaughter had just died. Well, nobody wants their grandchildren to die. Well, most people don't. Most people don't want their grandchildren to die. But we can't control that, can we? Death is a natural fact of life. So if you have someone that you're attached to, then inevitably, sooner or later, they're going to die. And as a result, you're going to suffer. Not because the person died, but because of your attachment. So because of that unwillingness to relinquish, that unwillingness to let go. So then here when the Buddha says, one who has no loved ones has no suffering, this is what he's pointing to. So he's not saying that you should go out and get rid of all your relatives or get rid of all your friends, necessarily. But rather what he's saying is that we should get rid of our attachment to any particular person. So cultivating that attitude of like, what if right now all of my friends and family were lost? Could I be totally okay with that? Could I be totally unbothered by that? Could I be totally unaffected by that? Would my happiness and serenity remain the same? And if the answer is no, if we actually would be disturbed and bothered by the loss of our loved ones, then that indicates that there's still defilements operating in the mind. It indicates that there's some kind of desire and attachment in relationship to those people. Or it indicates that there's some kind of aversion or resistance towards the natural course of things, which is the natural course of things is to change. So then that's what we need to examine. It's like, what is this desire and attachment, which is simply going to cause suffering? It already is causing suffering, and it will simply cause more as time goes by. Or what is this aversion, this resistance? Resistance to the laws of nature, resistance to the laws of causality. Well, that resistance, once again, it's just suffering. It's suffering now and it's suffering in the future. So when the Buddha says one who has no loved ones has no suffering, he doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, if you don't have any living friends and family that you don't suffer. But rather what he's saying is that if you have no attachment or aversion towards any person or in relationship to any person, then you have no suffering. And it concludes with a little verse, as is common in the shorter suttas. The Buddha says, all the sorrows and lamentations and the countless forms of suffering in the world occur because of those that we love. Without loved ones, they do not occur. That's why those who have no loved ones at all in the world are happy and free of grief. So aspiring to the sourless and stainless, have no loved ones in the world at all. So I also find this highly amusing because you're also getting a little glimpse here of the Buddha's sense of humor. So it's much more clear in Pali. A lot of it gets lost in translation. But all throughout the suttas, you can see the Buddha constantly making little jokes and word plays and making comments which are actually kind of deliberately poking fun at people or jabbing at people's defilements. And this is one example of that. So have no loved ones in the world at all. So again, that's pointing to not the person that we're attached to, but pointing to the attachment itself. And by the way, this doesn't refer just to people. So this again is clear in the Pali. So it's translated as loved ones, which we normally understand as meaning people that we're attached to, friends and family and so on. But in Pali it just says piya, which means anything which we love or anything which we have affection or attachment for. So it can also refer to objects or experiences, sensations. So anything whatsoever that we are attached to or fixated on or obsessed with will generate suffering in the mind. So when he's talking about having no loved ones in the world at all, this actually goes beyond friends and relatives. It actually is anything whatsoever that we are obsessed with or fixated on. All of that we want to cultivate the attitude of relinquishing, the willingness to let go of and be perfectly happy without those things or those experiences. So that's the end of the sutta. So at this point we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I see a few people checking in online, so hello to Gregory, Maria, Madeline, Rebecca, and Anand. Good to see you checking in. I don't see any questions though, so I think we'll go ahead and conclude the live stream at this time. Just a reminder that we have our weekly monk chat this evening, the Q&A session with opportunity to ask questions about anything related to Buddhism, so please join in for that. So that's at 7:30 New York time, in just under 12 hours. And okay, I just do see one question here. So Rebecca says, in the Metta Suttas, there's this simile of Metta being like a mother who protects her only child. This metaphor always confuses me, because mothers I know are all crazy with attachment. Yeah, so this is an important point. So when the Buddha is talking about cultivating metta like a mother has towards her only child, her beloved child, the Buddha here is talking about the attitude of kindness and benevolence and caring that one has. He's not talking about the attachment, the fixation, the expectation. That's not what he's talking about. So this is complicated because normally when we use the word love, normally we're talking about a mixture of wholesome and unwholesome components. When we say, I love that person, normally there's the sense of I care about them, I wish well for them, I want the best for them, but that's then mixed in with I am attached to them, I expect them to be in a particular way, I want them to be in a particular way, I seek certain things from them, certain experiences or gratification through them. So there's this mixture of wholesome and unwholesome components. In the Metta Sutta, the Buddha is focusing on the wholesome side. So, like, just as a mother protects her child, her beloved child, in the same way, we cultivate a boundless heart towards the whole world. So he's talking about that boundless heart which wants everyone to be happy and safe. That's the aspect of love that the Buddha is emphasizing in the Metta Sutta. And that's the only question, so we'll go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.